It was one of those warm evenings in New Orleans when the air itself seemed to hum with music. The streets were full of people laughing, dancing, and clapping along to the sound of brass instruments. It was the night of the annual River Street Jazz Festival, a small but lively event where anyone with a horn or a drum could show what they had. Among the crowd that year was a young girl named Clara Johnson, only 14 but already carrying her trumpet like it was part of her soul. She wasn't famous, not even close. She had learned to play by watching her father, who used to perform at small bars before he passed away. Music was her way of keeping a piece of him alive. Clara wasn't the kind of person who liked being in the spotlight. She was quiet, the kind who blushed when people looked her way. But her teacher had signed her up for the open stage contest that night, saying it would be good for her. So with trembling hands and a heart beating fast, she waited behind the stage with other local performers, clutching her trumpet case. What Clara didn't know was that someone special was sitting in the audience that night, a man named Miles Carter. He wasn't just anyone. Miles was a world-famous jazz musician, known across the country for his unbelievable trumpet skills. He had won awards, played in front of thousands, and had even performed at the White House once. People called him the soul of the horn, but lately fame hadn't felt as good as it used to. Miles had been touring nonstop, repeating the same songs, hearing the same applause, and feeling empty. Music, his first love, had started to feel like a job. So when his old friend, one of the festival organizers, invited him to the River Street event, Miles agreed, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'd rediscover that spark again. When Clara's name was announced, she nearly dropped her trumpet. Her hands were sweating, her stomach twisted into knots. She took a deep breath, stepped onto the small wooden stage, and looked out. The lights were bright. The faces in the crowd were blurry. She saw people talking, eating, some even laughing. Nobody seemed to care much. Then she saw him. Sitting near the front row, wearing a simple black hat and holding a cup of coffee, was Miles Carter. She recognized him immediately, the same man whose records her father used to play over and over. Clara's knees almost gave out. She couldn't believe he was right there watching. The host gave her a quick nod, signaling her to begin. The crowd quieted a little. Clara lifted her trumpet, took another breath, and started to play. At first, her notes came out shaky. A few people whispered. Someone coughed. But then something happened. As she kept playing, she closed her eyes and imagined her father sitting beside her, nodding to the rhythm like he used to. Her fingers began to relax and her sound grew stronger, raw, emotional, and full of feeling. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played to express something words couldn't say. The melody was old-fashioned, something her dad had written but never got to perform. It wasn't perfect. She missed a few notes here and there, but it had heart. By the time she finished, the crowd was silent for a second, and then applause filled the air. Miles Carter clapped too, slowly, but with real appreciation. Yet when the announcer asked the judges for comments, Miles only said, "Not bad." That was it. Just 2 words. Clara's face turned red. Not bad? That was all? She had poured her heart into that song. She gave a small smile, nodded politely, and walked off the stage, trying to hold back tears. Later that night, as people were packing up and the crowd started to thin, Clara sat on the edge of the stage, her trumpet resting on her lap. The stars were out, and the distant sound of another band played somewhere down the street. She was lost in thought when she heard footsteps behind her. "Nice tone," a voice said. She turned around. It was Miles Carter. He was taller than she expected, his face calm but serious. Up close, he looked older than the man in the posters. A little tired, maybe. He looked at her trumpet, then at her. "You've got something," he said. "You play with feeling. That's rare." Clara's heart jumped, but before she could thank him, he added, "But your timing's off and your breathing needs work." Her shoulders dropped a little. "I know," she said softly. Miles smiled, just a little. "You're honest. I like that." He paused for a moment, then said something that caught everyone nearby off guard. "Tell you what," he said. "Tomorrow night, same stage. You and me, trumpet to trumpet, a friendly duel." For a second, Clara thought he was joking. She laughed nervously. "A duel? With you?" He nodded, still serious. "You've got fire, kid. Let's see what you can really do." People nearby started whispering. A few musicians turned around, eyes wide. The idea of a legendary professional challenging a 14-year-old girl was unheard of. Some thought it was unfair, others thought it was crazy. But Miles seemed absolutely sure. Clara's mouth went dry. She didn't know what to say. Her teacher, Mr. Delgado, rushed over when he heard what was happening. "Are you serious, Mr. Carter?" "She's just a student," he said. Miles shrugged. "Music doesn't care how old you are. You either feel it or you don't." He tipped his hat, gave Clara a half smile, and walked away before anyone could argue. The crowd was buzzing now. Word spread fast through the festival. "Did you hear? Miles Carter challenged that young girl to a trumpet duel." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her trumpet case beside her. Her mother came in and asked what was wrong, and Clara told her everything. Her mother's eyes widened. "Sweetheart, you don't have to do this," she said. "He's a professional. People will understand." But Clara shook her head. "He challenged me, Mom. I can't back down. Dad wouldn't want me to." Her mom sighed and hugged her. "Then give it everything you've got." After she left, Clara sat up and opened her trumpet case. She picked up the instrument, feeling its cool metal under her fingers. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of crickets outside. She took a deep breath and started practicing. Softly at first, then louder, playing until her lips hurt. She went over scales, songs and rhythms, trying to fix every mistake she could remember from the night before. But deep down she knew it wasn't just about technique. Miles had said she had feeling, and that was something you couldn't practice from a book. Somewhere across town, in his hotel room, Miles sat on the balcony with his own trumpet. He played a few low, easy notes, letting them drift into the night. As he played, he thought about that young girl, her nervous eyes, her shaky start, and the way her music suddenly turned beautiful halfway through. It reminded him of himself when he was young, before fame, before stress, before everything became routine. He smiled faintly. "Maybe this will be fun," he muttered. By midnight, both of them were still awake, practicing in their own worlds. The young girl trying to prove herself, and the old master trying to feel alive again. When the sun began to rise over New Orleans the next morning, the whole town was already buzzing. The local radio station mentioned the upcoming duel, and people started calling it the River Street Showdown. Posters went up around the festival grounds. Reporters started showing interest. Clara walked to the park with her trumpet in hand, feeling both terrified and excited. Everyone she passed smiled or wished her luck. Even Mr. Delgado, though worried, told her, "No matter what happens, you've already done something amazing." She smiled shyly and kept walking. She didn't know how the duel would end, but she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't run away from it. That night, when the lights came back on and the stage was set again, the crowd would see something no one had planned. A young girl and a famous man, face to face, two trumpets shining under the spotlight. And though neither of them knew it yet, what was supposed to be a simple music duel was about to change both of their lives forever. That night after Miles Carter's challenge, the whole town couldn't stop talking about it. A trumpet duel between a world-famous musician and a 14-year-old girl was something no one had ever seen before. By morning, news had already spread to nearby towns. People were calling it the Jazz Duel or the River Street Challenge. But for Clara, it wasn't exciting, it was terrifying. She woke up early, feeling like she hadn't slept at all. Her lips were sore from practicing all night, and her hands ached from holding the trumpet for hours. Still, when she looked at the instrument lying beside her, she couldn't help but smile a little. She whispered to herself, "I can do this." Her mother knocked on the door gently and peeked inside. "You should eat something," she said. "You'll need your strength tonight." Clara nodded but couldn't swallow more than a few bites of breakfast. Her stomach was too tight with nerves. The whole day ahead felt like a mountain she didn't know how to climb. After breakfast, she grabbed her trumpet and walked down the street to her music teacher's small studio. Mr. Delgado was already waiting for her, sitting on a stool with his own old trumpet in his lap. He had been a jazz musician once too, but now he spent most of his days teaching kids like Clara. When she walked in, he gave her a kind smile. "So the famous Mr. Carter challenged you, huh?" Clara nodded shyly. "I don't know why he did it. Maybe he just wants to show off." Delgado chuckled softly. "Maybe. Or maybe he saw something in you." He motioned for her to sit down. "Let's see what you've got." Play the piece you did last night. Clara took a deep breath and started playing. The first few notes came out a bit uneven, but then she found her rhythm. She closed her eyes and let the melody flow, not perfect, but full of emotion. When she finished, Delgado nodded slowly. "You've got heart, Clara," he said, "but Miles Carter is not just any musician. His timing, his control, his improvisation, all of it is top level. You'll need to sharpen your skills if you want to stand your ground." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I'm here." They practiced for hours. Delgado made her repeat scales again and again. He clapped along, correcting her rhythm. When her breathing faltered, he showed her how to control it better. At one point, when she got frustrated and stopped playing, he said something that stuck with her. "Don't fight the trumpet, Clara. Talk to it. Let it talk back. Jazz isn't about perfection. It's about conversation." That line lit something inside her. She nodded, took a deep breath, and played again. This time, the music sounded smoother, more natural. It wasn't about competing anymore. It was about expression. Meanwhile, across town, Miles Carter sat in a small cafe sipping his coffee and reading the local newspaper. The front page had a big headline: "Legendary jazz star challenges local teen to trumpet duel." He shook his head and laughed quietly. "Well, this got out of hand fast," he muttered. A few people in the cafe recognized him but didn't dare interrupt. He didn't mind the attention. He was used to it. But something about this situation felt different. He thought back to the girl from the night before, nervous, shy, but with that unmistakable spark when she played. It reminded him of himself when he was young, trying to prove he belonged in a world full of seasoned musicians. That feeling, that hunger, was what he had lost over the years. And maybe, without realizing it, he was hoping to find it again through her. After finishing his coffee, he pulled out his trumpet from its worn case and played a few soft notes right there in the cafe. The owner didn't even stop him. Everyone knew who he was. The sound of his trumpet filled the room, smooth and flawless, every note perfectly placed. When he stopped, a few people clapped, but Miles just sighed. It sounded good, technically perfect, yet it felt empty. He whispered to himself, "Maybe that kid will remind me what it's supposed to feel like." As the day went on, Clara practiced until her lips went numb. At one point, she looked in the mirror and saw how red and swollen they were. Her mom came in and said, "That's enough for now. You'll hurt yourself." But Clara shook her head. "I can't stop now, Mom. I have to be ready." Her mom sighed but didn't argue. She knew this meant more to her daughter than anything else. By late afternoon, the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara sat by her window, watching people walk toward the festival grounds again. She could already hear the distant sound of drums and laughter. She picked up her trumpet and played softly, just enough for herself to hear. This time she wasn't practicing. She was remembering. She thought about her father and how he used to say, "Music isn't about showing off. It's about sharing a story." Those words gave her a strange sense of calm. The fear didn't disappear completely, but it softened. She smiled to herself and whispered, "Okay, Dad, let's do this." That evening, Miles arrived early at the stage to warm up. He stood backstage, looking out at the growing crowd. The place was packed, easily twice as many people as the night before. Cameras were set up and reporters were scattered everywhere. He shook his head, half amused. "Guess people really love a good story," he said under his breath. When Clara arrived, she froze for a moment. The sight of all those faces made her heart race. She could feel the weight of every eye on her. Mr. Delgado placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Remember what I told you," he said gently. "Don't fight the trumpet. Talk to it." She nodded, gripping her instrument tightly. As the announcer took the stage and introduced both players, the crowd roared with excitement. People whistled, cheered, and shouted their names. Clara took a deep breath, trying to block it all out. When Miles turned to her, there was no smugness in his eyes and just respect. "You ready, kid?" he asked. She smiled nervously. "I think so. Good, he said. Then let's make it music, not war. Before the duel even started, Miles surprised everyone by leaning in and saying quietly, "Don't play to beat me. Play to say something." Then he stepped back and began his warm-up notes, smooth and confident. The crowd instantly quieted. Every note he played seemed effortless, gliding through the air like silk. His fingers moved fast, his tone rich and deep. Clara stood there watching him, and for a second she forgot she was supposed to compete. She was simply in awe. When it was her turn, she lifted her trumpet. Her hands shook slightly, but she remembered her teacher's voice. "Talk to it." She started playing a slow tune, soft at first, then stronger. The melody wasn't complicated, but it was beautiful. It was the same song her father used to hum at night. The crowd leaned in, drawn by the emotion in her sound. Miles listened closely, his eyes narrowing, not in judgment but in appreciation. He could feel something genuine in her music, something he hadn't felt in a long time. When she finished, there was silence for a few seconds, followed by loud applause. Miles smiled, lifted his trumpet again, and said quietly, "Your turn inspired mine." And with that, the duel truly began. Not one of competition, but connection. That night wasn't just about who played better. It was about two musicians, one young, one seasoned, standing on the same stage, sharing their hearts through sound. And while the final notes hadn't yet been played, one thing was clear. Both of them had already found something they didn't know they were looking for. For Clara, it was courage. For Miles, it was meaning. And for everyone watching, it was a moment they would never forget. The night of the trumpet duel finally arrived. The air in New Orleans felt different that evening, heavy with excitement, like something big was about to happen. Every corner of River Street was glowing with lights, and people were already gathering near the main stage long before the show began. Word had spread far beyond the town. Musicians from other cities had come to see it. Some came out of curiosity, others out of disbelief. After all, it wasn't every day that a world-famous musician challenged a 14-year-old girl to a trumpet duel. Backstage, Clara sat quietly in a small folding chair, holding her trumpet close to her chest. She could hear the crowd outside, the laughter, the cheers, the endless hum of voices. Her heart was pounding so fast it almost hurt. Her teacher, Mr. Delgado, stood beside her. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. Clara tried to smile, but her hands were shaking. "Like I'm about to explode." He chuckled and patted her shoulder. "Good. That means you care. Just remember, you're not here to prove you're better. You're here to play your story." She nodded slowly, taking his words to heart. On the other side of the stage, Miles Carter stood by the curtain, warming up with calm, steady breaths. He moved with the confidence of someone who had been on stage his whole life, but inside he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a real sense of anticipation. He wasn't nervous about losing. He was excited to feel something new. The stage manager peeked in and said, "You're up in 5 minutes." Miles smiled and gave a small nod. Then he turned to look at Clara, who was still sitting quietly, eyes closed, taking deep breaths. He walked over and said, "You ready, kid?" She opened her eyes and smiled nervously. "As ready as I'll ever be." He grinned. That's all any musician can say. When they stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted in cheers. Flashlights from cameras flickered, and the announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the River Street Jazz Festival's most unforgettable moment, a one-of-a-kind trumpet duel between the legendary Miles Carter and the rising young talent Clara Johnson." The crowd whistled and clapped wildly. Clara's chest tightened as the noise hit her. But when she looked around, she saw familiar faces. Her mother in the front row, her teacher standing beside her, and even a few friends from school waving excitedly. That gave her courage. Miles stepped up first. He gave Clara a respectful nod, then raised his trumpet. The crowd went quiet. The first note he played was soft, almost gentle, like a whisper in the night. Then the melody began to build, smooth, rich, full of emotion. Every note seemed to float in the air, dancing above the crowd. His fingers moved quickly, his face calm, completely in control. It was mesmerizing. The crowd swayed to the rhythm. Some people even closed their eyes, lost in the music. When he finished his first round, the audience cheered so loud it felt like thunder. Miles lowered his trumpet and turned toward Clara with a small smile. "Your turn," he said. Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her legs felt like jelly, but she remembered what her teacher had said. "Don't fight the trumpet. Talk to it." She raised her trumpet and closed her eyes. For a few seconds, she didn't play at all. The crowd waited silently. Then slowly she began. Her first note trembled just a little, but she kept going. The melody she played wasn't fancy or fast. It was simple, emotional, and filled with honesty. It was the same tune her father used to play, the one he wrote for her before he passed away. Every note carried a piece of her heart. Her breathing followed the rhythm of her memories, soft at first, then stronger. The crowd could feel it. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. By the time she finished, the air felt heavy with emotion. No one made a sound. Even Miles just stood there, watching her with a strange, thoughtful expression. Then the applause came, slow, then louder, until the whole place was cheering. Clara lowered her trumpet, her cheeks red, eyes glistening. She had done it. Miles stepped forward again, smiling. "Beautiful," he said quietly. "Now let's have some fun." He lifted his trumpet again and began a new tune, fast, fiery, full of energy. His fingers flew across the valves like lightning. It was the kind of playing that showed why he was a legend. The notes twisted, turned, climbed higher and higher. The crowd shouted and clapped in rhythm. Some even stood up. Miles wasn't showing off, he was teaching. Every note said, "This is what's possible." When he finished, he pointed his trumpet toward Clara as if saying, "Your move." Clara took a deep breath. Her heart was racing, but she smiled. Instead of trying to copy his style, she did something unexpected. She started to echo his melody softly, note by note, like she was answering him. The crowd gasped. Miles's eyes widened a little. She wasn't competing, she was communicating. Every phrase he played, she replied to in her own way. It was no longer a duel. It was a conversation through music. Soon Miles caught on. He began to adjust his rhythm to match hers. They started to play together, not against each other, but side by side. His deep, rich tone blended perfectly with her clear, bright one. It was like watching two souls talk without words. The tempo picked up. Their melodies intertwined, creating something entirely new, something even Miles hadn't planned. The crowd was completely silent now, caught in the moment. Even the wind seemed to pause, then, as if by instinct, both of them slowed down at the same time. Miles played a soft line that seemed to float like smoke. Clara followed it, answering with a few gentle notes that felt like tears turned into sound. And then, silence. The music faded into the night, and for a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then came the applause, followed a wave of cheers, clapping, shouting, whistling. People stood on their feet. Some even wiped their eyes. Clara stood there, breathing hard, not sure if she had won or lost. But when she looked at Miles, he was smiling, a deep, genuine smile. He stepped closer and said quietly, "You didn't just play well. You made me feel something." She blinked, trying not to cry. "Thank you," she whispered. Miles turned to the crowd and raised his hand for silence. When the noise settled, he said into the microphone, "There's no winner tonight. Only music. And this young lady right here reminded me what real music feels like." The crowd roared again, chanting Clara's name. She covered her face, overwhelmed. Her mother ran to the side of the stage, tears in her eyes, clapping harder than anyone. Miles lifted his trumpet one last time and began to play a soft closing tune. Clara joined in beside him. The two melodies blended into one, his deep, warm sound wrapping around her bright, youthful tone. It was pure magic. When they finished, they bowed together. The crowd didn't stop cheering for several minutes. It wasn't just a performance anymore. It had become a story people would talk about for years. As they walked off stage, Miles placed his hand on Clara's shoulder. "You've got something special, kid," he said. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Clara smiled shyly. "You really think so?" He nodded. I know so. Backstage, Mr. Delgado hugged her proudly. You did it, he said. You didn't beat him, you moved him. And that's even better. Clara laughed softly, her nerves finally melting away. For the first time that night, she felt truly at peace. Outside, people were still talking, recording videos, and sharing the story. News reporters crowded near the stage. Everyone wanted to know who this young girl was who had stood her ground against a legend. But Clara didn't care about fame or headlines. She just sat down, holding her trumpet, still feeling the warmth of the music in her chest. Miles walked by, tipping his hat to her before disappearing into the night with his trumpet case. As she watched him go, she realized something. This wasn't just a duel. It was a moment that had changed both of them. She had faced her biggest fear and found her voice. He had found his heart again, and together, they had created a memory that would live forever in the sound of their trumpets. A story told not in words, but in music. The next morning, the small town of New Orleans felt different. The sun rose over River Street, shining on posters from the festival still hanging on the lampposts. People were still talking about what had happened the night before, the trumpet duel that no one would ever forget. It wasn't just a performance. It had become a story. People who had been there couldn't stop describing how it felt, how the crowd had gone silent, how the music seemed to touch something deep inside. Even those who hadn't seen it were now searching for videos online, wanting to feel what everyone else was talking about. For Clara, it all felt like a dream. She woke up late that morning, sunlight streaming through her window, her trumpet still lying on the table beside her. Her lips were sore, her arms ached, but her heart felt light. She couldn't believe it had really happened, that she had stood on the same stage as Miles Carter, the legend himself, and played beside him. When she went to the kitchen, her mother was already there, holding the morning newspaper. There on the front page was a photo of Clara and Miles standing together, trumpets raised, the headline reading, "The Duel That Stopped the City, Music Meets Magic." Her mother smiled proudly. "You're famous now," she said, handing the paper to her daughter. Clara laughed shyly. "I don't think I'm famous, Mom. People will forget soon." But she was wrong. Within hours, messages started flooding in. Her school friends texted her. Local reporters called the house, and even musicians from other states wanted to talk to her. Videos of the duel had gone viral overnight. Millions of people had already watched them. Some called her the girl who challenged a legend. Others called her the trumpet prodigy. But Clara didn't feel like a prodigy. She felt like the same girl who just wanted to make her father proud. Later that afternoon, she and her mother went downtown to get groceries, and people stopped her on the street. Some wanted to shake her hand. Others asked for photos. One little boy even said, "I want to play trumpet like you." Clara smiled and told him, "Then start today. Music is for everyone." Across town, Miles Carter was sitting in a quiet cafe, the same one he had been to a few days earlier. But this time there was a different look on his face, softer, lighter. He had been reading dozens of messages too. Reporters wanted interviews. Musicians were talking about how he had shared the stage with a young girl and treated her as an equal. But what mattered most to him wasn't the attention. It was the feeling he had rediscovered on that stage. For years he had played for applause, for money, for reputation. But that night when Clara had echoed his melody and turned it into something beautiful, he had remembered why he fell in love with jazz in the first place. It wasn't about perfection. It was about emotion, connection, life. As he sat there, he took out his trumpet and played a few soft notes, just for himself. They sounded warm and peaceful, like a smile put into sound. When he finished, he looked out the window and said quietly, "Thank you, kid." A few days later, there was a knock at Clara's front door. When she opened it, she nearly dropped her trumpet case. It was Miles Carter himself standing there with his hat in his hand and a small grin on his face. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. Her mother, wide-eyed, quickly welcomed him. He sat down in their living room, looking around at the small space filled with music sheets, instruments, and pictures of Clara's father. Miles smiled softly when he saw a photo of her dad holding a trumpet. "He played too?" he asked. Clara nodded. "He's the one who taught me. He passed away a few years ago." Miles nodded respectfully. "Then he taught you well." There was a brief silence, and then Miles looked at her seriously. "Clara, I wanted to ask you something. I've been thinking about it since that night. She looked at him curiously. What is it? He leaned forward slightly. I want you to join me for a few shows on my upcoming tour. Not as a guest, not as a student, but as a performer. I think you've got something real and people need to hear it. Clara froze. She thought she had misheard him. Me? Go on tour? With you? He smiled. Why not? You've already shared a stage with me once and you more than held your own. Her mother put her hand over her mouth, eyes filling with tears. Are you serious? She asked. Very serious, Miles said. Of course she'll need her family's permission and we'll make sure school doesn't suffer. But if you agree, I'll take care of everything. Clara didn't know what to say. It felt unreal, like the kind of story you only saw in movies. She looked at her mother, who smiled through her tears. If it's what you want, honey, go for it. Clara nodded slowly, her voice trembling. I'd love to. That was how it began, the start of something new. A few weeks later, Clara was traveling across the country with Miles and his band. The first few shows were nerve-wracking. She stood on big stages in front of thousands of people, lights shining down on her, cameras everywhere, but Miles always stood beside her, guiding her with a smile or a nod whenever she got nervous. After every performance, people would come up and say, that girl has magic in her sound. Miles would always reply, she reminds me of what music really is. The two of them grew close, not like a teacher and student, but like two musicians who understood each other deeply. Miles began teaching her things that couldn't be found in books, how to breathe with emotion, how to let silence speak as loudly as a note, and how to feel the audience's heartbeat through the music. One night after a concert in Chicago, they sat outside the venue looking at the stars. Miles said quietly, You know, when I challenged you that night, I thought I was testing you. But now I realize you were the one who tested me. Clara laughed softly. What do you mean? You made me remember why I picked up the trumpet, he said. You showed me that music isn't about proving who's better. It's about sharing what's inside. You can't fake that. Clara looked down at her trumpet and smiled. You taught me something too, that even legends get nervous sometimes. Miles chuckled. More than you know. Their tour continued for months, and each show brought new experiences. Clara's confidence grew. She learned how to handle mistakes gracefully, how to improvise, and how to connect with audiences no matter where she played. Back home, her town followed her journey with pride. The local paper wrote updates about her success. Schools used her story to inspire students, and the River Street Festival even renamed part of their stage after her father, calling it the Johnson Stage. It wasn't just a musical journey. It was an emotional one. Clara's mother often said, You didn't just play your father's song, you continued it. One evening, when the tour reached New York City, Miles surprised Clara by inviting her to perform a solo at a grand jazz theater. The stage was massive, filled with lights and an audience that seemed to stretch forever. When she stepped forward, trumpet in hand, she wasn't nervous anymore. She played the same song she had played the night of the duel, her father's song. But this time her sound was richer, fuller, more mature. When she finished, the crowd gave her a standing ovation. Miles stood behind her, clapping proudly, a smile on his face that said more than words ever could. That night, as they walked off stage together, he said quietly, You've come a long way, Clara. Your father would be proud. She looked at him and said softly, I think he is. Miles nodded, and you've made me proud too. They didn't know it yet, but their story, the one that began as a challenge, was now inspiring thousands of young musicians around the world. People started saying, If Clara could face her fear and play beside a legend, maybe I can follow my dream too. For Clara, that was the best part of all. Not the fame, not the applause, but the thought that her music could give others the same courage she once had to find in herself. Months passed, and the tour came to an end. The final concert was in Los Angeles, at a grand open-air theater filled with thousands of people. The night sky was clear, and soft lights glowed around the stage, giving everything a golden warmth. Clara stood behind the curtains, holding her trumpet close to her chest. She could hear the crowd cheering outside, waiting for the music to begin. Even after performing dozens of shows, her heart still raced before everyone. But this time it wasn't out of fear. It was excitement. Miles walked up beside her, dressed in his usual black suit and hat. He looked calm, but his eyes carried the same energy she felt. "Ready, kid?" he asked with a grin. She smiled. More than ever. They stepped onto the stage together, and the sound of applause filled the air like thunder. Cameras flashed, people stood, and the air was alive with energy. The band started to play, soft at first, then stronger, smoother, like a heartbeat that grew louder with every second. When it was her turn, Clara lifted her trumpet and began to play. The notes soared into the night sky, sweet, pure, and full of life. Each sound carried emotion, and every person in the audience could feel it. Some closed their eyes. Some smiled. A few even wiped away tears. Miles joined in, his trumpet blending with hers, creating a sound so rich and deep it felt like a conversation between souls. It wasn't about who played better. It was about sharing one story through two hearts. When the song ended, there was silence for a moment, and then the crowd erupted in applause. People stood up, shouting her name, clapping, cheering. Miles turned to her and said quietly, "You did it." She smiled, her eyes shining. "We did it." That night marked the end of their tour, but for both of them it was also a beginning. After the concert, Miles gathered the band backstage. He looked at everyone, musicians who had been with him for years, and said, "You all know how much this tour meant to me. But I want you to know something. This young lady reminded me why we started doing this in the first place. Music isn't about fame or money. It's about heart. It's about making people feel alive again." He turned to Clara and handed her a small old brass mouthpiece, the one he had used in his early days. "This was my first," he said. "I think it's time it belongs to someone who will carry the sound forward." Clara stared at it in disbelief. "I can't take this." "It's yours," he smiled. "No, it's ours now. Just promise me you'll keep playing with the same fire you had that night in New Orleans." She nodded, holding it carefully as if it were made of gold. "I promise." The next morning, the newspapers were full of stories about the concert. Headlines read, "The final note that touched 1,000,000 hearts, and a legend and a new star shine together." Clara's picture was everywhere, smiling beside Miles, trumpet in hand, but fame didn't change her. When she returned home, the first thing she did was visit her father's grave. She brought her trumpet and the mouthpiece Miles had given her. Sitting there quietly, she said, "Dad, I did it. I played on the biggest stages just like you dreamed, and I found someone who reminded me of you, someone who believes in music the same way you did." She lifted her trumpet and played softly, a song that was only for him. The sound was gentle and full of love. As she finished, a soft breeze moved through the trees, and for a brief moment, she felt like her father was right there beside her, smiling. After that, life took on a beautiful rhythm. Miles continued touring, but now he played fewer shows, spending more time teaching and mentoring young musicians. Clara, meanwhile, decided to start something of her own. She opened a small music school in her hometown, right near the river where the festival had once been held. The sign outside read, "The River Street Music House, where every sound has a story." Children from all over came to learn from her. Some wanted to play jazz, others wanted to try rock or classical. Clara never pushed anyone in one direction. She always said, "Music is about feeling. Play what your heart wants to say." Every Friday, she held open sessions where anyone, young or old, could come and perform. Sometimes, she'd even surprise them by joining in with her trumpet. Those nights became the soul of the town. People would gather, clap along, and laugh together. One evening, years later, as the sun was setting, Clara got a call. The voice on the other end said, "He wants to see you." It was about Miles. He had grown older and wasn't performing much anymore. Clara immediately took the next train to New Orleans. When she arrived, she found him sitting in his old favorite cafe, the same place he used to visit when he wanted peace. He looked thinner, a bit tired, but his eyes still carried that same spark. When he saw her, he smiled. "There you are, my favorite trumpet rival." She laughed and hugged him. "How are you feeling?" "Old," he chuckled. "But good. You know, I've been watching what you're doing with that school. I'm proud of you, Clara. You've done something I never did. You've passed the fire forward." She sat beside him, and they talked for hours about music, about life, about how one night had changed everything for both of them. At one point, he looked out the window and said quietly, "You know, I never told you what made me challenge you that day." She raised an eyebrow. No, you didn't. Why did you? He smiled faintly. Because I saw myself in you. The way you held that trumpet, the way you looked at the stage, and I knew that spark. I wanted to see if it was real. And you proved it was. Clara smiled softly. You gave me the courage to believe in it. He nodded slowly. Then we both won, didn't we? They sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft music playing from an old radio nearby. It was a trumpet tune, slow, nostalgic, beautiful. Before leaving, Clara took out her trumpet and played a short melody for him. He listened, eyes half closed, smiling the whole time. When she finished, he said quietly, "Keep playing, Clara, never stop. As long as you play, I'll still be listening somewhere." She promised she would. A few months later, when the news came that Miles had passed away peacefully in his sleep, Clara didn't cry right away. She just sat quietly, holding her trumpet, remembering his words. That evening, she organized a small concert in her music school to honor him. The entire town came. There were candles, soft lights, and photos of Miles throughout his long career. When it was her turn to play, she stepped up and said to the crowd, "He once told me that music isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing what's inside you. So tonight I want to share what he gave me, the courage to play from the heart." Then she lifted her trumpet and began to play. The sound filled the air, gentle but powerful, reaching every corner of the room. It was a song she and Miles had once played together, a melody that carried both joy and sorrow, memory and love. By the time she finished, many in the audience had tears in their eyes. After the performance, Clara walked outside and looked up at the stars. For a moment, she could almost hear a faint trumpet sound in the wind, echoing softly, as if Miles was answering her from somewhere far away. She smiled and whispered, "You'll always be part of the song." Years later, when people spoke about Clara and Miles, they didn't just talk about the duel or the tour. They talked about the friendship that grew between them, how one challenge became a bridge between two generations, how one shared melody changed both their lives. Young musicians often visited her school and asked, "Do you really think one song can change the world?" She always smiled and said, "Yes, because it changed mine." And every time she picked up her trumpet, she remembered that night on the festival stage, the moment a challenge turned into harmony, a rivalry turned into respect, and two souls found a connection through the language that needed no words. Music had brought them together, and in its own quiet way it kept them together and forever.